pump shutoff head and pump shutoff pressure are two terms that, while they're real terms, it doesn't exist in the S211 book, and it doesn't exist in the PMS 419 instructor guide. Head pressure is essentially the shutoff pressure. So in other words, if you were to set up a pump to a certain pressure and you didn't account for nozzle pressure and friction loss, then the water would flow up through that line, reach that point, and then stop. That is called shutoff pressure. And so if we draw this out, okay, and let's say that we have, using simple terms here, such as we'll use the Lost Horse Creek fire term. They had 753 feet of elevation, which produced, if you do the divisor rule of thumb method, it's going to be about 376 psi. But if you multiply it by 0.434, the method that I recommend that you and others like you use, you're going to get a more accurate number. And that number is 326 psi. Okay? So 376, rule of thumb, 326. So that's about a 50 psi difference right off the bat. But if you look at this number right here, you can avoid running into deadhead situations if you first look at, okay, what is it that my pump down here, okay, is capable of producing versus what is being demanded just by head pressure alone. So look at that. Whenever you look at a situation, look at what the head pressure requirement is, because that's the one thing you cannot overcome. You can try to mitigate it, but and what I mean by you can't overcome it is, it is there. You're not going to add more hose. You're not going to do a parallel hose lay. It is a solid set number based upon the elevation in feet above the pump, and we use a multiplier or a divisor to come up with a pressure, and that is a hard number. So it doesn't matter the diameter of the line, it doesn't matter how many lines, you can't overcome it. That's what it is. Now, to mitigate it, you can break it up. So you could have 2 or 3 pumps in the middle and start stage pumping. You can mitigate it, but you cannot overcome the pressure itself. Once it's there, it's there. So at any rate, so getting back on track, if we have the 376 psi and our pump discharge pressure down here equals 380, okay, I want you to look at something right now. 380 psi, 376 psi. So pump discharge versus the head, that's a 4 psi difference. You're not going to be able to do any flow with it. You're not going to be able to supply a nozzle with it. That should be a big warning right there. To determine shutoff head, let me show you what this is, because you're going to see that it's real close to head pressure. So shutoff head equals the PSI times 2.31 divided by the specific gravity of the fluid that you're working with. Now, in fire, since all we do is move water, the specific gravity equals 1. So essentially, this formula reduces to just PSI times 2.31. So if you were to go 380 times 2.31, you're going to get 878 feet. So the shutoff head, remember, head is always in feet, equals 878 feet. Now, determining head pressure. 878 feet divided by 2.31 equals 380 psi. So when you hear the term shutoff head and shutoff pressure, I want you to remember that the shutoff head is the elevation in feet that the pump will be able to move water up to, and then it will stop. Another thing is that shutoff pressure means is that, hey, if I throttle this pump up and I'm able to reach a certain pressure, it's not going to go beyond that. So just remember that. Now, let's look at how this had an effect on the Lost Horse Creek fire, as well as the Crescent Fire Scald Injury of 6 years prior in 2017. But we'll start with the Lost Horse Creek fire first. So the Lost Horse Creek fire, they had 753 feet of elevation. They had a Mark III pump here and a Mark III pump here. They were running a line straight into each other, and then the report doesn't say, but one could only imagine that they were probably running lateral somewhere off of here. We're not going to talk about that because, again, the report does not convey that information, so I can't determine what was going on. But here's a bad situation already in the making that if somebody was a good enough instructor should have caught this and allowed them to even avoid setting it up this way. In fact, I know folks have done this in the past and have probably not had any problems. I would implore anybody, do not set your pumps up this way. You're asking for a problem. And I'm going to show you why. If the PDP, okay, regardless of your flow, if the PDP equals 380 psi on the bottom, okay, and you're trying to move that way, if we assume that the pump up on top, since it's going downhill, was, let's say, slightly throttled back, but let's say the PDP equals 300 psi, plus the elevation, which we know from just discussed, it was 326, the actual number, okay, plus 326 psi, you have 626 psi that is going to be working its way down to this pump. So, the difference of that is 246. So in other words, what would happen is that it's going to overshadow this pump by an additional 246 psi. That's essentially what I'm getting at. So this pump right here would be as if it was 246 psi lower in elevation, and I can tell you what that is right now. So 246 times 2.31, 568 feet. So basically, it has a hydraulic effect as if this pump was 568 feet lower than where it was. That's the problem with shut off head and shut off pressure. So that's what happened on the Lost Horse Creek fire. And then not only that, with regard to the Mark III on the bottom, it didn't have a clappered Siamese, or a correction, it did not have a clappered check and bleeder valve on it. And so when the guy had the Y on the discharge of the lower Mark III pump, so we'll draw this out again. So Mark III, so we'll just do it this way. So there was a Y down here, comes up, Mark III, and we can assume that there was nothing up here, but we got a Mark III here. So there was no check and bleeder here. So when this guy had the 1 inch line, this is 1.5 inches, okay, for recirc, and then here was a draft line. So draft line, Mark III, gated Y, no check and bleeder valve, all of this pressure, okay, PDP again, plus head pressure equals 626. It could have been, it most likely was a lot more than that. I'm just saying that that's what it was. But we'll just call it 626, was hitting this, no check and bleeder, this pump running full bore was just barely doing everything that it could do to keep the water at bay. Okay, likely no flow. It likely deadheaded right there at the end of that Y. Now, When this individual sensed that there was a problem with this line and opened up the 1-inch line to recirc to cool it off, all of this pressure shot through here. It released the pressure on the discharge side of the Y, effectively making it to where there was no resistance to the backflow whatsoever. So all 626 psi came shooting right straight down through the pump, because there's no check valves inside of this, and blew out the bottom. It was already heated, what I would say pretty much supercritically, and I'm going to explain how that happens in a second. And then that's what happened. Had this individual had a check and bleeder right here, when he opened that, this pressure would have closed that off, and this flow would have worked the way that it was supposed to, the way that he would have envisioned that it would have worked. So that's what set this up. A very similar situation with the Crescent Fire Scald Injury. They had two Type 3s. Okay, 734 feet of elevation gain. They had a Type 3 here and a Type 3 here. They had two lines running into it, 1,500 feet of hose lay, approximately, and each truck was at 250 to start. Okay, but because they're in a parallel pumping mode, it cannot overcome the head pressure. So even when they went up to, the report says that they ended up going up to 290 and 290. Still not going to reach the head pressure requirement of 318 psi. The head overrides the pump discharge pressure, and that's the watch out. If your pump is less than the head pressure, that equals a do not flow. You will deadhead. Always make sure that your pumps, whatever their pump discharge pressure is, exceeds at a minimum the head pressure. If it does, you're going to get flow up there. Okay, so now let's look at how to determine the time rate of change in degrees Fahrenheit per minute of what's actually going to happen. So the formula for determining the rise in temperature in degrees Fahrenheit per minute is given by the formula this way. So you have 42.4 times the pump shut off horsepower divided by the weight of water in pounds inside the pump chamber times the specific heat. Okay, now this 42.4 is basically a constant. So it's from the fact that 1 horsepower equals 2,544 BTU per hour. If you take the 2,544 and divide it by 60, it equals 42.4. Okay, so it's basically BTU per pound per minute, or BTU per horsepower per minute. That's what this is signifying, and that's why we're using it, because we want to find out how much time in minutes before our pump goes supercritical. So in the Lost Horse Creek fire write-up, they said in there that the pump can reach 200 degrees in as little as 3 to 5 minutes. Well, I'm going to show you how that happens. So for Mark III, 42.4 times the pump shut-off horsepower, we're going to use 10. Okay, divided by the weight of water, so we'll say it's, we'll just use a gallon, so we'll say it's 8.34 pounds. I think that's excessively high for a Mark III, but I don't know for certain, so but we'll go with it. So 8.34 times the specific heat of water, which is 1 in industrial term, not for calculating BTU for thermal absorption on a fire. This is a different formula, so they use 1. Now that equals 424 divided by 8.34, and that equals 50.8 degrees Fahrenheit per minute. So if you're at deadhead, okay, so if you're back at this 753 feet of elevation, you got your Mark III, you're pumping uphill. If you're deadheading and your water temperature that you're pulling with, we'll say is 50 degrees, okay, then that means in 3 minutes time, it will be just a hair over 200 degrees. And that's how you do that. Now, what would it be if it was half a gallon, so 4.17 pounds? This would then come up to 101 degrees Fahrenheit per minute. So, when they talk about shut-off pressure and shut-off head, what they're actually saying, guys, is that when you have a pump or anything that is going to work against the discharge of your pump, and you can calc this out, you can find out what the pressure is and get the difference in pressure, convert that to equivalent head, then you can find out approximately where this is. So let's say that we have a Mark III and we've got a gauge on it and we're at 250 psi, okay? PDP is 250 psi, okay? Well, 250 psi is going to be, let me get my calculator here, times 2.31, 577 feet. So let's say that's about right here. Okay, 577 feet, okay? Out of 753, so that's the shut-off pressure for that elevation. So anything that is above 250 psi is going to keep me from going above 577 feet. Now, let's talk about another element here. Shut-off pressure is not etched in stone. It's not a fixed number for every pump. It's not universal. It changes. So if we have for example, let's say that you're a federal firefighter with the U.S. government, okay? Pick an agency, it doesn't matter. But you're on a type 6. You don't really know, you haven't calculated anything out, you're throttling up, they've strung out, let's say, 1,000 feet of hose. You estimate that it's only a couple hundred feet in elevation gauge. You don't really know, but you just throttle up and you stop at like 210 psi, okay? So, PDP equals 210 psi, okay? Well, again, what's the shutoff head? How far up is that gonna go? Again, 210, so psi times 210 equals, I think it's 485, 210 times 2.31, 485. 485 feet. If you change your PDP to 280, the shutoff head is going to go up. It's only going to go up to that elevation and it's going to stop. So if you're working with head, you can find out the shutoff pressure. If you're working with pressure, you can find the shutoff head. Don't think that it is just a one number and this is all that it pertains to. But for wildland fire and for our pump systems and what we deal with, this is perfect. This will definitely help out. Any questions that anybody has, I suggest that you talk to your local guru. If you can't find them or you have other questions, you can certainly email me at hydro@wildfireengineer.com. You can also look up wildfireengineer.com as well as firebridge.substack.com. Also, with what you've just seen, I give a pretty detailed analysis about how to look at this with the formulas on my website, wildfireengineer.com, wildfireengineer.com, called Understanding the Capacities of the Mark III and Any Other Pump. It goes over in more detail that you can download the document for at the website. Thank you and have a good day.